with the Love Army, and this is our very first teach-in as a part of our Summer of Love and Resistance. I am super thrilled to be joined by two of the great shining stars in our movement. We have Alicia Garza, who's here, Alicia Garza. She loves us so much that she's actually doing this while she's getting her hair braided.
Yes.
Getting her hair did. Getting her hair did. That's love for the struggle. So glad to have Alicia Garza here. Also, Valarie Kaur, who I think most of you know. If you don't know the name, you've seen her beautiful statements and speeches and stuff online and all up in your feeds, all up in your social media. She's going to be here as well. What we wanted to do was have just an hour or so to hear from these two sisters talking about what we're calling love as an act of resistance. So often love gets given the short shrift, like it's some weak thing or some pitiful thing, and we sometimes act like hate is stronger than love. So we want to talk about, as we build the resistance, how we keep love at the center and why that's actually the more fierce and the more radical position to take. So, but the Summer of Love and Resistance is a 10-week campaign. We got weekly teach-ins, we got actions, we have events on the ground. We're going to be trying to teach skills, get you plugged in. I know how hard it is to be getting beat up by the news every day, getting beat up by your social media feed every day. And but this summer is a summer for both love and resistance. So before I bring on Valarie, who's the founder of the Revolutionary Love Project, I want to give Alicia Garza an opportunity to speak to us. Everybody knows you're the co-creator of Black Lives Matter. They may not know that you're also the special projects director at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, which is an organization that has really put women and women of color and immigrant women and women as workers at the center of your contribution, your strategy, your vision. So you are a walking kind of representative of race, class, and gender, but also of caring about real people. And I want to just give you a chance to talk to us a little bit, Alicia. When we talk about love as an act of resistance, what does that bring up for you?
Thanks, Van, and thanks for having me. And thanks to you all for joining. And yes, I am getting my hair braided right now. This is an act of self-love. And then doing this on camera, of course, is an act of love for each of you. So I appreciated you starting off talking about Black Lives Matter and the National Domestic Workers Alliance, because both of those entities, I think, have really influenced how I think about and how I practice the act of love in my daily life, but also through the work that I do with domestic workers, through the work that I do with Black people and our allies all over the world. For me, the place of love inside of resistance movements, and in particular, the place of love inside of the work that we do, is what actually drives me to do the work. And I say that because I know you just talked about how, lots of us are getting beat up on our Facebook feeds or our Twitter feeds or social media or on television, right? And that can make it really difficult to love each other, to love ourselves. But love for me is the anchor that keeps me going, and it's the compass that I follow. It's the compass that helps me make decisions about what I do next and why I do what I do. And so I wanted to just spend a little bit of time talking about why I think that love is important in this particular moment, why I don't think it's a hippy-dippy idea. I actually feel, for me, like it's something that I'm both spiritually and politically committed to. And I also just want to talk a little bit about kind of what that looks like in practice. So I'll just share for a couple of minutes. First and foremost, for me personally, when I think about love, what that means to me in a non-abstract way is that love is care. It's the things that and the people that I care for the most, the people and the things that I feel like I can't live without. that my life would not be the same, right, if those things were not present. And for me, when I think about the state of this country right now, when I look around at what's happening, when I see, you know, our government essentially dismantling a major piece of our safety net, which is healthcare, I wonder how it is that we can continue to build a practice of love in a time that feels so troubled and so hateful. And so for me, what it goes back to is that I think that we need love right now in this moment, and that we need to practice love every single moment of our lives, because I think it's the only thing that will get us from where we are now to where it is that we hope to be. We clearly live in a country that is pretty deeply impacted by not only the divisions that this country itself has created through fear and greed, but we're also impacted by the results of that, right? What does that do to our visions of ourselves and what we think is possible for ourselves and who we can be? And what does it do to our vision of what we think this country can be? What does it do to what we think this democracy can be? And so for me, I put love at the center of an ethos that drives me to want to build a better economy for domestic workers and for poor people and for Black people and all people, really, who are impacted by inequality and disenfranchisement. I want love to be the ethos that drives me to build a better democracy, a democracy that I think we deserve, but we don't yet have. And I think that the ethos of love and a deep, abiding love for our people, for humanity, and for who and what we have the potential to be is what should drive us at every moment. And it's something that I try and practice every single day. I want to share a quote that's one of my favorites, which I think for me illuminates how love is in practice. And James Baldwin said that love takes off the masks that we fear we cannot live without, and we know we cannot live within. And for me, what that strikes is that love is really about a deep vulnerability. It's about a courage to be vulnerable, and to not expect that same vulnerability in return, but to do it because it's the right thing to do. It is the initiator of what can connect us through care and through compassion. And essentially through the interconnectedness that we already experience just by being human beings on a planet that depend on each other to survive. I also think that for me, love signals what it is that I can't live without. And love for me powers how it is that I get to the things that are so important to me, that I will protect them at any cost. And so for me, what that looks like, it looks like setting healthy boundaries, right? Being able to say no to things that don't serve me, but even more than just on an individual basis, things that don't serve us, right? So some examples of things that I know don't serve us, right, are unaccountable governments, right? What doesn't serve us is Black kids getting shot down in the street with no consequence, right? So the ability to say no and set boundaries around what we will and won't accept as a story of who we are and who we want to be in the world. For me, also, love is about setting and having courageous conversations. Courageous conversations is a term that a lot of people use. Let me break it down really quick. Courageous conversation is literally having the courage to tell another person something that may be scary, but that needs to be said in order for us to move forward. And so for me, love in action is about having courageous conversations. So, you know, there's lots of ways in which in our movements we can have tensions. And Van and I are certainly no stranger to those kinds of tensions. But where I find that love exists is where we care about each other enough to tell each other things that are hard, but with the intention, right, of making us the best that we can possibly be. So courageous conversations that get us closer to really reaching our potential and the greatness of who we can be. For me, love also is about speaking up. It's about resistance, and it's about stopping bad things from happening, even if they aren't happening to you. When I think about love in this context, I think about what recently happened in Portland, where a bystander, saw a young Black Muslim girl being harassed on a train, and the person intervened. And in fact, they ended up being stabbed as a result of their intervention. When I reflect on what kind of courage it took to be able to step in and stop a bad thing from happening, even though it wasn't happening to you, I think that that is one of the deepest forms of love that can exist. Love for somebody that you don't personally know, but that you deeply believe deserves to live in their dignity at all times, at whatever cost. That is a deep sense of love, and that is how I think love shows up in our resistance movements and in our everyday resistance that we practice with each other. The last thing I'll just say here is that I believe that love is the thing that will also heal the movements that we need to build, that can be the most effective, the most impactful, and that can dig into the well of compassion that we need to keep moving together. That's where love is not abstract for me. Certainly, we all deal with all kinds of tensions in our everyday lives. And those of us who are active in these movements and somewhat visible in these movements receive a lot of vitriol, right? Some of it is deserved, and some of it is not. And it would be really easy to just cut ties, cut connection, and walk away. But for me personally, love is what keeps a connection. It also sets a boundary, but it keeps a connection, and it says, hey, what happened between us wasn't okay, but I love you enough that I want us to move forward together. And that is something that I feel like I'm still grappling with personally. It's a growing edge of mine. But quite honestly, I don't see how our movements survive without the ability to love each other enough to forgive each other when we make mistakes, to give each other room to work things out, to think things through, and to try new things. And also to be able to be in the same space together and love each other deeply, even when we vehemently disagree with one another. One of the things that I feel so grateful to be in community with people like Van and Valarie around is just this notion of, that we deserve better than what we have, and that not having so much of what we deserve has made it so that we have identified the wrong enemies to fight. And so knowing that, right, really grows a compassion inside of me. It doesn't mean that I don't get angry. It doesn't mean that I don't feel hurt. And it doesn't mean that I don't want to crawl away and be like, don't ever talk to me again. But what it does mean is that if I am deeply committed to both the practice and the ethos of love as resistance, it means that I have to resist the temptation to make enemies out of people who are actually on my side. And so I'm going to end there. We'll have more conversation, and I look forward to hearing what the other folks in our panel have to say. Thanks for having me.
Well said and beautifully put. And I know there's going to be a lot of questions. I have questions, but I have to wait like everybody else. But I deeply appreciate your commitment to being. It's easy to love people you don't know. The people, the masses, the humanity, movie stars, but trying to love the people who we're actually working with every day can be very, very challenging. And I appreciate you raising that. Well, Valarie Kaur is someone who has really taken the stand very seriously. The Revolutionary Love Project, which is, I think, one of the most beautiful expressions of our resistance, had an amazing conference and gathering very recently. I got a chance to go there and be in her presence, and I'm glad that she is in our presence now. Valarie, what would you want to add to the conversation so far?
Well, I first want to say I'm just so moved to share this space with you both. Van, I see you as brother, Alicia as sister in the struggle. And so to see your words and your work out in the world, I draw strength from you. I draw inspiration from you. I love you both. I also just want to give a shout out to the entire team at LoveArmy, Matt and Kalia. And, you know, Van, I do see like LoveArmy and Revolutionary Love Project as being a movement within the larger movement, a movement within the resistance. And that means that we have to embody it. We have to embody what we are putting out in the world. And I have to say, every moment I've had with you or your team has been a life-giving one. Has been, you helped me find joy in the struggle. So thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to share with you all the story of how I came to believe that revolutionary love is the call of our times. And I say this because I'm a lawyer. And actually, Van and I both went to Yale Law School. So Van, we were trained to cringe at the word love, right? We were trained to be suspicious of it. And yet here we are. We've come to this place where we're fighting with and through love. And so why? So I want to share the story about why. When I was 20 years old, watching the Twin Towers fall over and over again, the grief still raw in my throat, I saw in the next moment a picture on the screen of a turbaned and bearded Osama bin Laden. And within moments, I realized that our nation's new enemy looked like my family. My grandfather sailed by steamship from India to America 100 years ago. He was detained by immigration officials who took one look at his turban, put him in Angel Island, where he languished for months. But he was released by a lawyer, a white lawyer who did not know him, who did not see him as foreigner or as enemy, but saw him as brother, released him on a writ of habeas corpus, Christmas Eve, 1913. My grandfather became a farmer in California, and when his neighbors were incarcerated in concentration camps during World War II, he was one of the few who hooked up his horse and buggy and went out to the desert to go see them. He looked after their farms so they would have a home to come back to when no one else would. So I grew up with these stories of my grandfather showing me what it meant to be a Sikh, to practice the Sikh faith. And Sikhs are not Muslims or Hindus. We are a separate, revealed religion, 23 million worldwide, 500,000 in the United States. Very few people actually know about us, even though we've been here for 100 years. Our religion is about a religion of love and oneness, Ik Onkar. And we wear these articles of faith, including long, uncut hair, which men and some women wrap in turbans, to show you that we will serve you in your time of need, that we will clothe you, we will feed you, we will fight for you if you need to, if you need help in your time of need. And so imagine the dissonance then at 20 years old to realize that suddenly my long hair and my brother's turbans now marked us as terrorists in the aftermath of 9/11. Within moments, hate crimes broke out on city streets across America, and ever since then, every time our Muslim brothers and sisters are attacked, it is our blood in the street too. On September 15th, a Sikh father was standing in front of his gas station in Mesa, Arizona, planting flowers when he was gunned down by someone who called himself a patriot. He was someone I called an uncle, Balbir Singh Sodhi. Balbir Uncle's murder almost 16 years ago turned me into an activist. It actually turned a generation of Sikh and Muslim Americans into activists. I became a lawyer, a filmmaker, an organizer, and in all of these years, for the last 16 years, we have fought. And with every film, with every lawsuit, with every social action campaign, whether I'm working in the inside of supermax prisons or on the shores of Guantanamo or at the site of mass shootings where the blood is still fresh on the ground, every time we have showed up to fight, I thought that we were making the nation safer for the next generation. And then my son was born during this election season. And I realized that I am raising a little brown boy in a country that is more dangerous than the one that I was given. Even more dangerous for him than the one that my grandfather arrived in 100 years ago. Hate crimes are now just as high as they were in the aftermath of 9/11. Anti-Muslim hate groups have tripled in the last year. And what it means to be brown right now in this country, to be in a brown body or Sikh body or Muslim body, means to be living in a perpetual state of siege. Because anytime the government, through rhetoric or policy, targets our people, criminalizes our people through policies, as this administration has, we have seen hate crimes go up. And so just yesterday, the Supreme Court's decision to reinstate parts of the Muslim ban means that we are bracing for more violence to come. It means that the threat of bigotry is just braided into our lives. And so whether it's the killing of Srinivas Kuchibhotla in Kansas City, or the 2 men who were murdered on that Portland train that Alicia just talked about, or the body of a Muslim girl just recovered in Virginia just over a week ago, the hate violence has been relentless. And so I had an existential crisis last year. I had a great job at Stanford Law, and I left it. And I asked myself, what is the only thing that has actually created change for the communities I have worked with? And it was never my lawsuit or our film or our campaign. Those things were essential for any movement. It always came down to a surprising question. Is there love here? Because anytime people, when they are wounded, receive love from the people around them, it enables them to heal. It enables them to respond in creative and loving ways and fight for justice over the course of years. But in the absence of love, I've seen that wound fester and oftentimes cement into hate, which then cycles into its own destruction. Is love here? Love. It's hard for me to talk about love even now, because love has been captured by Hallmark cards in this country. Hallmark cards and chick flicks and pop songs. Love is too soft, right? Love is a private emotion relegated to the domestic sphere, the sphere of women traditionally, historically. Love is not meant to be a public force. Love is too sentimental, too fickle, too anemic to be a political force. And yet our great social justice leaders, from Gandhi to King to Mandela to Chavez, they knew that love was a wellspring that gave people courage that they did not know they had. And so I asked myself, what would it mean to fight with love? We are fighting relentlessly in Congress, in the courts, and on the streets, but here's the truth. No number of policy wins will solve the conditions that gave rise to this presidency. No number of policy wins will solve the conditions that fuel the threat of raids, detentions, deportations, border walls, pipelines, or hate crimes that threatened our communities long before this presidency. No number of policy wins will change the white nationalism that has captured the White House and large segments of this population. No number of policy wins will end what the Southern Poverty Law Center calls the era of enormous wage. How do we change the underlying conditions? We need to change the way that we see each other. We need a new public ethic that enables us to see others not as foreigners or suspects, but as brothers and sisters whose destinies are bound up with our own. How do we do that? How do we cultivate enough love to change how we see? You know, the last time love was central in American public discourse was during the Civil Rights era, when leaders like Dr. King talked about love as a form of justice. So we can draw upon that heritage, and I think that's what we're doing at LoveArmy and Revolutionary Love Project, but we cannot go backwards, because love as a public ethic has only been framed in this country in religious terms, and specifically Christian terms. We're a new generation. This is a new time. This is a new context. And so what we are doing is redefining love for a new time as a secular ethic, as an ethic that is inspired by various wisdom and faith traditions, but also art, history, and literature, so that secularists and humanists can find a home in love too. And so what does it mean then to cultivate enough love in our culture to break open the stereotypes that seize our country right now? Black as criminal, brown as illegal, indigenous as savage, women and girls as property, trans as immoral, or Sikhs and Muslims as terrorists. Because when we see each other caged by these stereotypes, it becomes easier to sit back and allow policies that incarcerate us, that deport us, that detain us, that kill us. How do we cultivate that love? I think it begins by how we define it. And so I want to leave you with what we've worked up so far at the Revolutionary Love Project. It's a definition of love that pulls from Erich Fromm and bell hooks. Love is the will. Love is the choice to extend our will for the flourishing of others, opponents, and ourselves. Love is not just a feeling. Love is an orientation to the world, a commitment to ask of everyone we see, who are you? Who are you? What is at stake for you? What is my role in your flourishing? What is your role in mine? My hypothesis here is that it takes 3 kinds of love for love to be revolutionary. First, love for others. Love for others, to look upon the faces of those who we do not know and say, sister, brother, I see you, I choose to love you, and therefore I will fight for you in your time of need. This is solidarity. This is what it took for the 2 men in that Portland train to stand up. Love is dangerous business. Right? Guru Nanak, the founder of my faith, said, if you want to play the game of love with me, step forth with your head on your hand. It is risky to ask people to love like that. And yet that is what we're asking people to do. To love with their head in their hand, to show up like that lawyer did for my grandfather, or like my grandfather did for his Japanese American neighbors. And that's what we're doing right now in our movement when we say no ban, no walls, no raids. But then the second kind of love is love for our opponents. So how do we take that same ethic and apply it to people who disagree with us, even people who hurt us? How do we do that? I have come to learn that forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is freedom from hate. I will never forget what that man did when he took my uncle's life. I will not forget what the terrorists did on 9/11. I will not forget what the demagogue in office is currently doing to our communities. But forgiveness is not forgetting. It is freedom from hate. I refuse to hate you because I refuse to be like you. And if I refuse to hate you, then that means I have to affirm your humanity and that you have a story too. And it calls me to hear your story, just as I hear the stories of my brothers and sisters, not to affirm their veracity, but to listen for the cultural forces and the institutions of power that nurtured that aggression in you, that nurtured your own wound, because you are acting from your own woundedness, real or perceived. And to fight better, to fight smarter, means to change the conditions that allow you to hurt us, to change the institutions of power that continue to allow you to hurt us. That's why we love our opponents, because it's smarter movement building. Finally, so love for others, love for opponents. But we also have to practice revolutionary love for ourselves. And this is what my sister Alicia just spoke about so beautifully. Gandhi and King and all those social justice leaders, they talked about love for opponents and love for others, but they didn't talk about this one. This is a womanist intervention. This is Audre Lorde. This is bell hooks. This is declaring that self-care is an act of political warfare. Because here's the truth. Too often, women of color, we have bled for movements. We have bled in injustice, but we have also bled in struggles against injustice. And too often, the movement happens on our backs and over our dead bodies. Too often, the movement mistakes our suffering as service. But no more. It's time for us to embody the wellness, the dignity, and the liberation that we are fighting for out in the world around us. And that's why Alicia is getting her hair done today. That's why we draw strength and community from one another. Because joy is an act of moral resistance. So here's the secret. It takes all 3 kinds of love for love to be revolutionary. If we love just ourselves, just the yoga and the smoothies, that is very tempting, but that's escapism. If we love just our opponents and not ourselves or others, well, that's self-loathing. If we love only others and not our opponents and not ourselves, that's ineffective. And everyone, this is where our movement is right now. We're doing the solidarity thing well. We're investing in that. But we are starting to mirror the very vitriol that we're trying to resist. And we're running on fumes because we're not taking good care of ourselves. We're only a few months in, everybody. We have years to fight this fight. I've been fighting 16 years. You all have been fighting for decades. We know that if we want to sustain this movement over the course of our lifetime, we need to ground it in something deeper. We need to ground it in love. Love for others, love for our opponents, and love for ourselves. And that's why I am so honored to be here with you, to feel like we're not doing this alone. We don't give birth alone. We don't go into battle alone. So to be talking about love and championing love and fighting with love with my brothers and sisters, this is how I'm getting through each day. So thank you, Van, for letting me share all that.
Yeah, beautiful. I don't know how to applaud or do standing ovations or stuff on these devices we have. But whatever you're supposed to do, that was beautiful. And I know that others have things that they would like to add. We will go to questions shortly, but I wanted to just make a few comments of my own, just to echo my sisters. I do think that we have a misperception that to stand in love is to be weak. Basically, if you love your opponents, that means you let your opponents run you over and just sing kumbaya and hope that they do better. And that's not my understanding. And I wanted to share a little bit about some of the people I studied and who I've taken inspiration from. Nelson Mandela, Amilcar Cabral, and Wangari Maathai. These are all great giants of African liberation movement, either not well known or not well, not well known or not well understood. Nelson Mandela, obviously the most famous, but I don't think that people really appreciate sometimes why he is so beloved. Nelson Mandela, not like Gandhi, not like Dr. King, was not a pacifist. He wasn't somebody who believed in nonviolence at a high spiritual or philosophical level. He in fact founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, which was the armed wing of the ANC when nonviolence wasn't working in South Africa after a couple of decades. And yet, when it was time for him to even take that kind of a stand, he was very clear that he did not want to demonize or dehumanize his opponents. He wasn't fighting against the white South Africans, the Afrikaners, so much as he was fighting for them. He wanted for them to be freed from the hatred and the system that they had created to enslave others. And so when he got out of prison, having been in prison for 27 years, when he sat down to talk with his jailers, with his oppressors, the first thing that he said to them in Afrikaans was he retold their story. He told them about their own greatness. He told them about their own battles. He told them about their own contributions. And then he said, with a people such as this, I'm sure a just resolution is possible. The reason that was such a powerful thing for him to do and to say was that even speaking Afrikaans was something that a lot of Black radicals had rejected. In fact, a whole wave of student movement had been saying, we're not even going to learn this language. We don't want to learn this language. But he decided to use that language to build a bridge. He also did something else I think that was very important. When he articulated his vision for a future South Africa, he was very clear. Even though he was Xhosa, he had a place in his own imagination for the Zulus. Even though he was Xhosa, he had a place in his own imagination for the Afrikaners. He wanted he had a clear view that every single person in South Africa had a place of dignity and honor in the South Africa that he was trying to build. He even put his own jailer in his cabinet. De Klerk, he actually put in the cabinet with him. People, a lot of people in the ANC went crazy. Like, what? But he said, no, I want to see a South Africa where I'm not just calling people out, I'm calling them up. I want all of us to be greater. And because that was a stand that he took, a lot of bloodshed was avoided. Now, South Africa is certainly not a paradise. And you can rightfully criticize some of the shortcomings of the South African Revolution, and I certainly do. But there's something about that revolution, there's something about the way that Mandela proceeded. It was a divided country. It was a country with horrific racial violence. And he could have gone any number of directions, but he chose to, without calling it revolutionary love, he chose to embody a kind of revolutionary love for himself, for his people, and for his opponents. And I think it's something that we could learn from. Amilcar Cabral, less well known, but also a freedom fighter in Africa. I'll just briefly say about him that he also was engaged in armed struggle, and he also tried to minimize the negative effects of that. and even so far as capturing soldiers from the colonizer side and giving them his food, giving them his medicine, giving them, I should say, his opponents, giving them the kind of positive treatment that they had denied his own people, and then even letting captured soldiers go and sending them on their way. And they were shocked. These Portuguese soldiers were shocked because they had been so brutal toward the African people. And yet when they were captured, they were treated with their human rights respected even more so than they had been respected by their own government. And after Amilcar Cabral was assassinated, a lot of those junior officers who had fought against him in Africa got on boats, went back to Portugal, and overthrew the government and the Revolution of the Roses in Portugal, inspired by that example of Amilcar Cabral. And then lastly, Wangari Maathai, who's the first African woman to get the Nobel Prize, known for planting her women's movement, planting 1 million trees. And people missed the point. She was organizing women to plant trees because she was organizing against the military dictatorship. And that entire movement based on love for the earth, I guess that might be another of the others. Another of the others that we need to love is also the earth, or a part of our family, the family of life that we need to love. And so she in taking care of women and taking care of the earth, was nurturing a pro-democracy movement that ultimately wound up prevailing. And she wound up serving in the government and even helping the soldiers that had beaten her then stand guard over the forest that the women had planted. These are the kinds of stories of serious struggle by serious revolutionaries in the African context that have a quality to them that I think we can draw from. We have a divided country. There's history of racial violence and gender violence and LGBT violence and all kinds of other violence. And we have to fight. We can't allow people to be mistreated, and we can't allow people to mistreat others, because when you mistreat others, you're also falling short of your potential greatness and goodness. And yet there has to be a way to do it where we don't become the thing that we're fighting, and we don't feed what we're fighting, where we actually feed something deeper, both in ourselves and in our opponents. And so that's my contribution to this discussion. But what I will do, having talked a bit, we started a little bit late, so hopefully we can go about 10 minutes or so longer. And I know that there are questions out there, and I'm going to ask Kalia and Matt and other folks to send me some so that I can read them. But Alicia, do you want to reply to either of our comments as we wait to get these questions sorted out?
I just thought that, I mean, both of you are just incredible, and I feel so honored to be in this conversation, even after the fact, right? I feel like this is something I'm going to take with me for many, many years to come. This piece that you raised, Van, around not becoming the very thing that we are trying to fight is so important. And I think we really underestimate that. I think that I know that the way that I was trained as an organizer was very much about being angry, quite frankly. It was about being angry and taking that anger and doing something about it. And about 5 years in, what I realized was that I was just angry all the time. I was just angry, and I was angry at the world. I was angry at the movement. I was angry at my organization. I was angry at my members. You know what I'm saying? I was angry at everybody. I was angry all the time. And what that did was it actually cut my ability to be able to imagine what was possible, like what I was fighting for. I got so stuck in what I was fighting against that I didn't breathe into what am I fighting for. And as a result, and I saw this also in our members, where people would come in and they would be angry and they would want to join an organization because they were angry about what was happening. But we had to do work inside of our organization to actually cultivate the transformation of anger into a deep love, because anger in and of itself isn't sustainable. But we're also not trying to sustain anger. Like, if we get to the other side, which I deeply believe that we will, if we get to the other side, what's waiting there for us? And I think about that all the time when I think about my relationships with people, when I think about people who I deeply disagree with and who actually, in many cases, hold my life in their hands. And I think about some of the critiques that people raise around, I'm not going to love this person who doesn't love me. And the only thing I can offer is, when we win, and I believe that we will. I believe that winning is a process, but ultimately I believe that we will win. When we win, who are we going to be? Are we still going to be angry, bitter, broken, upset, distrustful, disconnected? Or are we going to be so elated that what we won was our actual humanity? That there's no space for that. There's no space to be the thing that we're fighting. And so I just really wanted to underscore that and appreciate it, because I think it's easier said than done, that's for sure. But I think it's one of the most important ideas that we have to turn into practice very quickly if we're going to make it out of this next phase of history.
Amen. Valarie, how does those words strike you?
Oh, there's like truth. Oh, Lisa, it made me think of what I've discovered is that the opposite of love is not anger. The opposite of love is indifference. That we need to honor our anger. We are angry because we care. But anger is not bad. Anger is not sinful. Anger is valuable. Anger makes us alive. And the thorn in anger, the problem with anger is when we hold it in isolation. When we hold it in isolation, that's when it can fester into hate toward ourselves or toward others. When we hold that anger in community, and we hold that anger in a community that is committed to love, then anger just becomes part of what it means for love to be revolutionary. We move through anger to release creative potential. And I know that we need community to do this. And I want to share the story about why last fall I was at my uncle's 15-year memorial. Every year they hold a memorial at the gas station where he was killed in Arizona. And I'm putting the red roses on the memorial, and I'm putting the candles down, and his brother is standing next to me, and his brother looks at me and says, "Valarie, 15 years and nothing has changed." And I asked him, "Ranaji, who is the one person we have not yet tried to love?" And so the next morning, my uncle and I call Frank Roque, the murderer of Balbir Singh Sodhi, in prison a few miles away from that gas station. And the phone is ringing and my heart is in my ears, and he answers and he starts saying, "Yeah, I'm sorry for what happened to your uncle, but I'm also sorry for what happened on 9/11. And he goes on, and I start to get angry, right? I'm thinking there are limits to love, right? You do not call your uncle's murderer to forgive him. There are limits to love. I'm angry. But Rana Sodhi, Rana is next to me, quiet, listening. He holds my anger, but he is quiet enough to listen to Frank Roque's story. And Rana says, "Frank, this is the first time I have ever heard you say you were sorry." And Frank says, oh, he's heard, right? So yes, I am sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to your brother, your uncle, Valarie. And when I go to heaven to be judged by God, I will ask to see your uncle, and I will hug him, and I will ask for his forgiveness. I'm weeping. You know, that's how I know, right? That's how I've learned that forgiveness is not forgetting. Frank is going to stay in prison, right? Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is freedom from hate. When we're free from hate, we can listen to our opponent's story. And I can think about the kinds of alienation and the kind of masculinity in our culture, the kind of terror in our culture that drove him on that shooting rampage. I can think about the culture, and I can fight smarter to change the culture, because for every white nationalist we tear down, for every terrorist we tear down, for every authoritarian in office we tear down, there will be more to take their place. So how do we change the culture? And I think that seeing love as actually quite fierce and revolutionary and smart. Smart is the thing that I've learned.
Mm-hmm. Make sure you can hear me? Good. Okay. Well, that's a powerful story, and I'm so sorry about what happened to your uncle. You know, it's a tough thing, this whole forgiveness thing, and I appreciate your example on it. I was in South Africa when the murderer of Chris Hani, who was a big leader in the ANC, a big leader in Umkhonto-we-Sizwe, the armed wing, a big leader in the SACP, the South African Communist Party, beloved figure in South Africa, beloved by the young people. He was gunned down in his driveway by a racist Afrikaner. And I was in South Africa when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission met, and the murderer of Chris Hani came out, and he spoke about what he did. And there was no requirement at the TRC to apologize or to express regret. As long as you sort of confessed, that was enough. And he came, and he was just completely unrepentant. He just said, you know, he was a godless communist. He was going to impose godless communism on my country, and as my patriotic duty, I killed him, just like that. And I was really angry, and then a bunch of activists started to march on the center. And it was Chris Hani's widow who stood up in front of this big crowd of people that were going to march in there. And she said, comrades, we are here because the ANC has asked for our participation. We must not disrupt these proceedings. Go back to your homes. And, you know, this woman who, you know, she more than anybody should have been furious, was able to keep a bigger vision of what the ANC was trying to accomplish, what Desmond Tutu was trying to accomplish, what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was trying to accomplish, and she kept that movement moving along that trajectory. But it's very, very difficult in those moments. And you know, your relative who was able to keep his moral center despite that provocation, I think that's a great example. But this is the kind of conversation that I think is important for us to have, because of what Alicia Garza was saying. At some point, we are going to win. And when we win, who will we be? Will we be bitter or better people for having gone through this long, you know, period of oppression and frustration? And I think it's incumbent upon us to try to take now as a chance to try to become better. Because if you build a movement that is bitter and not better, when it governs in a bad way. So
yeah.
Anyway, but like, other people want to get in, so let me read. I'm so sorry. Let me read some of these questions.
We can just keep going on all night.
Yeah, I know. Let me see. So one question is, are there times when it is dangerous for us to love? What about when people's hate makes us vulnerable to their violence? What about how do we deal with the fact that people aren't just hating in their hearts, they're also doing violent things toward us? Or are you suggesting we make ourselves targets?
No, that's not love for ourselves. So the thing that I want to emphasize with telling the story of forgiving my uncle's murderer, I could not have done that the next day. I could not have done that if he was still there with a gun pointed at me, when it would not be safe to do so. I couldn't even do that 10 years later. It actually took me 15 years to be able to undergo the process of holding my anger and my rage and releasing it and get to the point where I could be there, and probably his brother too, to be able, truth and reconciliation, when it's deep and when it's real, it takes time. Transformations of the heart sometimes take that long. So it took me 15 years to forgive my uncle's murderer. It may take more than just a few months for people to reach out across to their neighbor or their uncle who voted for this president, a vote that put their lives in danger. And I say to them, it's okay, actually, not to reach out right now. If you are holding anger, your job is to hold it in community. Your job is to hold it with others who love you, to take love in, right? Love for others and opponents and ourselves. They all don't happen at the same time, at the same high pitch. You know, it's about cultivating love when we need it. And there are a lot of people in the fire right now. If you're Black, if you're Muslim, if you're Sikh, if you're LGBTQI, we need to take in a lot of love from others right now. We need you to be in the fire with us. We're already in the fire. We don't have a choice. So come and be with us in the fire. Stand up for us, because we can't just stand up for ourselves. We'll get gunned down, like literally deported, detained. That's what will happen to us. We need you to be in there with us, right? And so it means something different, I think, for each of us. And I think the question everyone can ask themselves is where can I cultivate love in my life right now?
Well said. Let me throw another question out there, and Alicia, you may want to jump in on that one or the next one. But somebody asked the question, what do we think about all these right-wing memes that are now saying that the left is violent? You know, we are concerned about the hate crimes that are coming down on our community, but if you listen to the right-wing media, they're making it such a big deal about that the left wing is violent. Alicia, have you been seeing any of this stuff where the people on Fox News or whatever will take something from maybe something in Berkeley or something that happened and then run it for 3 weeks and all that stuff? Is that something that you're paying much attention to? Alicia?
I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm hearing it and I'm sitting with it because...
you don't have to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't... well, here's what I feel, honestly. I think that we talk about violence in a lot of different ways, and I think it's really helpful to get clear on what violence is and what it is not. And we don't have time to get into all of that in this teach-in, but I think that there's a real way in which both sides really can really manipulate broader images related to who we're seen to be in the service of somebody else's agenda. And so that's what I see when I see this kind of going back and forth about, well, the left is violent or the right is violent. It's like, it's really, I mean, there's lots of different kinds of violence that are happening in our communities every single day. And they're not all the same. They're not all equal. And it doesn't mean that some violence is better than other violence. It just means that it's hard to compare different forms of violence when ultimately the result is that each form of violence deeply impacts people in ways that last for generations. And so there's that, and I just want to kind of put that there. I do want to respond, though, to the earlier question around, you know, does that mean we just let people hurt us? And, you know, love is a really scary thing. It's really scary to open oneself in a way that essentially opens you up to deciding that you are going to listen to someone else's experience, even if that experience is something that has impacted you in a deep way. I mean, Valarie, your story, I think, really exemplifies how it is that it's not about letting people run you over. But like love, one act of love is about setting boundaries, and it's also about protecting yourself. But there's times when protecting ourselves is not in service of our mission. Protecting ourselves is the easiest thing to do in that moment because we're running or we're hiding from other things. And so I think that's just something to sit with. And I'll give a concrete example quickly. You know, I hear a lot of people talking about, you know, whether or not Black Lives Matter hates the police, right? I actually feel like it's a red herring kind of a conversation, but it comes up a lot where people say, oh, Black Lives Matter hates the police. And then we're in this position where we have to say, we don't hate the police. And then it's this weird back and forth that is actually a distracting conversation from what's really at stake, right? So what's true is that we have a a series of systems in this country that perpetuate inequity on a bunch of different levels. And what's also true is that human beings, actual people, make choices each and every day as to whether or not they are going to carry out that agenda. And what is also true is that people's lives are impacted by that every day on all sides of the equation. And so should we, run and hug and kiss the person who murdered Philando Castile? No, but it is important to understand why did they feel like they needed to do that, right? What was going on for you where even though something happened that was obviously wrong and obviously bad, right? That you made a choice to do something else in that moment that resulted in a series of after effects for a family that will never be the same because they'll never have their loved one back. For a 4-year-old who was in the back seat who saw a loved one be murdered by the people who were supposed to keep them safe. And so I use that story just to exemplify that I make distinctions between systems and individuals. And I also recognize the ways in which systems and individuals interplay and interlock. And there's a much longer conversation to be had about what we consent to, what we agree to, what we agree to participate in, even when we know it's not the right thing to do. But ultimately, I would agree with Valarie that the question of love isn't about being a martyr. The question of love is about having perspective over what it is that we're trying to build, who it is that we're trying to be. And also, I think the challenge of practicing love in this moment is that it shows us a lot about who we are right now, and it forces us to face that. So I'll leave that there for now.
Good stuff. I have a couple more questions. One is, I'm sorry, my computer keeps doing this weird thing. Sorry, I'm not the best at the technology, but okay, so this actually goes right along with what you were saying. So how does culture hold people back and restrict the progress toward love? And how do we manage all the different cultures that are at play? Let me just say a few things about that. One of the things I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for in the United States is we do have every kind of human being ever born here in one country. We have every race, every gender expression, every kind of sexuality, every faith, every income level, the richest people, some of the poorest people, especially when you look at the Native American, the ones that are struggling more. You have literally every kind of human, all in one country. We pretty much get along. I mean, compared to what you might expect if you just took a bunch of people, shook them up and threw them into a room, you might expect a lot more. So I do think that we have been able to do things that would have been considered a miracle 100 years ago. I mean, you have countries right now, they have 2 ethnic groups and they fight all the time. They can't get along with 2 groups. We've got like 40 different languages spoken in the public schools in Oakland alone. So there's something there that is very promising and very inspiring, and yet we continue to backslide into these retrograde cycles where just horrific people who are the worst of themselves shine, get real momentum. And what part of the LoveArmy has been trying to do is, like, we have to do 2 things at the same time. And we've got to stick up for the people who are being the Muslims. Now, I was called the Sikhs, and now I'm learning, sticking up for the Sikhs, and there aren't any Sikhs, they're Sikhs. So I hope I still get credit.
Oh yes, you do. I just want to say, if you say Sikh, no one will correct you, because we are just happy you know who we are. So you can say Sikh, you can say Sikh, and we will still call you brother.
Very good. I appreciate that. It's terrible when you realize you spent 15 years standing up for a group that doesn't actually exist. So so anyway, so the Sikhs the Sikhs, the Muslims, the Native Americans who are being treated like, you know, I mean, having these dirty needles of these pipelines shoved into their communities when they don't want them, need to be protected and supported. Jewish Americans who have come under much more vicious fire than I've ever seen in my lifetime. We almost don't talk about that. With
Yes.
Jeff Sessions saying he's going to fight the drug war, our Latino brothers and sisters who are coming under such fire under this retrograde immigration stuff. So you have to stick up for all those people. And at the same time, there is this cultural group that feels unfamiliar in its own country now, as it would say. And you've got a bunch of white, downwardly mobile, often male, mostly Christian folks, from one point of view are the dominant group, but from another point of view, is that they're losing ground economically and socially.
Mommy.
And so the question is,
Mommy.
do we only say to those people, you had all the goodies, you ate all the cake and all the ice cream and the whipped cream and the nuts and the sprinkles, having to share with everybody else, and you're throwing a fit and you suck and we don't like you. Is that the right approach? Is that who we want to be? Is that effective? Is that smart? Is that loving? Is that wise? Some other place that we need to stand with regard to them comes out of it, just with regard to those white gendered males, blah, blah, blah. Do we have a place of love and honor for them? I mean, Mandela had a place of love and honor for the Afrikaners. Do we have a place of love and honor and respect where we really say to those guys, look, we appreciate you, we respect you, we want you to do well. And our movement is for you too. I mean,
Yes.
I don't know if we're there yet, but that's the next challenge. Can we look at those folks and say, look, we got some beef here. I want you to have a good job. I want you to feel, I want you to feel it from a different place, but I'm for you. I don't want corporations, you know, ripping you off and making you work for nothing and throwing your factory overseas. I'm for you. LoveArmy, we spent a bunch of time coal miners who have been thrown under the bus when it comes to their pensions and their health care. Obviously, I'm against coal. Coal miners, especially sick and retired coal miners who have, you know, basically gave their life to a company, and that company's now grabbed the money and run away. Somebody with black lung disease die because a big corporation doesn't want to give them what they earned if you say you're a progressive. So it's been an amazing experience working across these lines and recognizing, no, actually, I have to confess, I think I drew my circle too small for a while in my life. My circle included enough of the literal and death sorts of struggles that have been going on in some of these white communities. The opioid painkiller overdoses. From these opioid painkiller overdoses, then we're dying of HIV/AIDS at the height of the crisis. I remember during the AIDS crisis, we were marching every day, attacking the medical establishment over these opioid painkiller deaths the way we did over HIV and AIDS as liberals. I'm beginning to say to myself, obviously the most hateful, the most violent ones, I have a different policy toward. I say to myself, I do think that I could be accused of too small, and
Yes.
I want to draw it bigger.
Yes.
Now, I don't know how to do that right. I don't know how to do that right, and I'm going to make mistakes. This is like when somebody, all these different cultures or whatever. If what we say is true, we're going to become a minority, then that means they're a big cultural group. And they're not just the system, they're a big cultural group. And they might start acting the way that other minorities act. They may start getting paranoid, scared, like we have been. And so is there any way to I throw that out there because I think this is the kind of conversation you can have when you're talking about revolutionary love that will get you run out of some other conversations. But I think it's worth talking about. Am I wrong, Valarie?
You are right, sir. You are right. You are on the right track. And that's why we were so proud to join with you to fight for the coal miners. It was bold, and I never have seen any progressive in a recent campaign get as much pushback as you did, making that stand. It was bold. Why should we? They voted against our interests. But here's my experience after the election. I decided after the election that any vote for this president was a moral failure. Any vote. Either because you shared the racism, vitriol, xenophobia, sexism that this president harbored, or because you did not think it was a deal breaker. And I think a great segment of the population just didn't think it was a deal breaker. Either because they didn't know our stories or didn't care to know our stories. I still believe they have the capacity to know our stories and care for us. But if I'm making such a claim, then I have to own my own moral failure too. It was my moral failure to, on all these years, 16 years as an activist, to have never fought for a group that wasn't defined by their race or religion or orientation. I never thought about poor white folks. I never thought about coal miners. I never thought about the lack of upward mobility. I never thought about how those grievances could so easily be captured into white nationalism, racism, and rage. This is not excusing them for their vote or for their rage or for targeting people who look like me, but I have to own my part in drawing that circle too small. And so I think it's no coincidence, Van, that we both arrived at this place of claiming love, love for all, and because love is not a finite resource. That's what capitalism wants to make you think it is. That if I give too much love over here, I won't have enough love over here. But the human heart is vast. The human heart is infinite. We have the capacity to love. If I had the capacity to love my uncle's killer, I know that we have the capacity to love people who vote against us. I know that as a truth. We have the capacity to love, and love is not an exchange economy. I don't love you because I expect you to love me back. And mothers know this. I don't know if you all saw my son just climbed up into my lap and I just went with it and put him. I know he's taught me so much about love. Love means not loving because you think you're going to be thanked or ever paid back. And love means we can love someone without knowing them. You know, the very first time I saw my son's ultrasound, I didn't know if it was going to be a boy or a girl or what sex, what gender. I just saw this blob on the ultrasound and I began to cry and I thought, hi, I'm going to love you for the rest of my life. I didn't have to know my son in order to make this deep commitment to love him. And it was built into my biology, it was built into my bones. But every morning I have to ask him, who are you? As the minute I think I know who he is, I'll stop being able to give him what he needs. He changes every day. I have to ask, who are you? We have to ask that of our spouses, who are you? The minute we stop being curious about who our spouse is the moment our marriage starts to die. So of course, it's then imagine extending that love out to people who do not look like us. Even people who disagree with us, people who we can only hear their slogans and see their signs, and we want to demonize them because those signs are crazy, and those signs are against me, against my right to exist, but I do not know you. I have to claim my fundamental unknowingness, that you are fundamentally unknowable to me. But if I choose to see you as a brother and sister, as a person, and I choose to love you, that means I have to ask, who are you? Who are you, person who voted for this president in Appalachia? Who are you, person who is marching in the street against Muslims in front of that mosque? Who are you? Why? What is your woundedness? Why are you so scared? Why are you so wounded to be threatened by me? By me. And if I can ask them, if I can draw close enough to hear their story, then maybe when we sit and make our blueprints for policies and we offer up a vision of the country at the Democratic National Convention, they can hear a vision of the country that includes them too. Because we have chosen to love them first. It doesn't begin with the head, it begins with the heart.
Well, look, I have just been notified that we are 15, almost 20 minutes over, but I still listen. I've enjoyed this conversation a great deal. Here's what I have to do before we close. And if there's any practice that you would want for people who are watching this now or later to know about, any book, anything that they can take away, that's something that would be greatly welcome. These teachings are supposed to give people a little something for now, but also a little something for later. So think about that. Yeah, or anything you want them to do or join, or any action you want them to take. Just give people a little bit of, and then I'll close it out. Alicia, would you like to go first?
Sure. This was fantastic. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. 2 books I will leave you with is All About Love by Bell Hooks, which is a fantastic interrogation of how we understand love in this context, which has influenced me deeply. Another book that I think helps to look at how people have had to sustain a deep and profound love over time when it felt like it just wasn't going to happen is a book called There Is a River by Vincent Harding, which really chronicles the many, many tributaries of the Black liberation movement. So I would recommend both of those. And then just as a practice, you know, I spend 10 minutes in silence every day, and I just sit with what comes up, and it helps me get to know myself and what I'm grappling with, what I'm scared of, what I don't want to do. And also it reveals a lot about what I'm proud of. And so, you know, it doesn't have to be connected to any particular, you know, body, but if you just give yourself 10 minutes a day for yourself, to look at yourself as you are, nobody else watching, just you and you, I think it will reveal quite a bit. That's it for me. Thank you.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for being here. It's there's very few people in our movement who are, their name is the answer to a Jeopardy question.
On my favorite show. That was so cool.
Exactly. So thank you for all you've done for I mean, I knew you before Black Lives Matter. You were on the front lines working on issues of poverty and justice, and teaching and lifting up, you know, long before the hashtag. And you'll be here in our hearts for forever and ever. So it means a lot to me to have you on our first teaching. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Valarie?
I'll leave you with 3 calls to action. 1, it starts with the heart. It starts with how we see one another. And so I offer you a meditative practice of the heart that I've been doing every day. When I see people who are in harm's way, people I don't know on the screen or in the street or on the news, I think to myself, sister, brother. And just naming them as sisters and brothers instead of strangers or foreigners or refugees, I see what spontaneous action that arises in me, that cultivates in me, and then I do that thing. Ethics is spontaneous. It goes the same for people who I see. You know, there was a group of men at a table at a restaurant who used the word sand, Nigger, very loud. People have used that word while beating people who look like my brothers. And so if I said that's a table of bigots, I would have walked away. But I thought, that's a table of my uncles. And that naming them as uncles made me stand up and go talk to them. And it led them to see me as a sister. So just naming people that you see, grandmother, father, sister, brother, son, daughter, that you see around you in your world, or as you're moving through your daily life, passing on the street or seeing on the screen, just see what that arises in you. That's I think, how to practice the ethic of love for others and for our opponents. So second call to action is love for ourselves. I believe joy is an act of moral resistance. I realized for weeks and weeks after the inauguration that I hadn't posted a single picture of my son on his private Instagram account. And I realized that I wasn't going to let this administration steal my joy of watching my son grow up. Joy is an act of moral resistance. So what is the thing that makes you joyful in your day? How do you protect it? Every evening, we're about to go do this. My son and I, we have evening edition, my husband. We read stories, we read poems, we dance. We have bath time, we do our prayers. It takes like 90 minutes, everybody. It's a serious commitment, joy. And on the night of the election, as we're watching the results come in, my son is pulling on my blouse and saying, "Mommy, story time?" I looked at my husband, I'm like, "On a night like this?" He's like, "A night like this." And so we are dancing on election night. "Baby, you're a firework." And in the dance, I start to smile, I start to feel joy, and I realize, oh, if I can ground myself in joy and every single day, then I'll be strong enough to fight this. That's how I'm an activist, because of the joy. Third call to action is journey with me, journey with us at LoveArmy, journey with us at the Revolutionary Love Project. I'm writing a book right now on revolutionary love. We are developing tools and practices. We run an annual conference. It's happening again in New York City come April, and we partner with LoveArmy all the time in putting out our calls to action as we explore together what it means to champion love. Remember, we can't go backwards. We're building something new here. And so I invite you just to go to revolutionarylove.net. You'll see a lot of amazing faith leaders like Reverend Barber and Jackie Lewis and Angel Kyoto Williams. You'll see thought leaders like Van Jones, Opal, Alicia's sister in the struggle. You'll see a lot of us there pledging this commitment to love. And if you sign this declaration of revolutionary love at revolutionarylove.net, then you'll be going on this journey with us. You'll see us in your inbox and on social media. And I'm happy to say we've been volunteers all this time, and we have just gotten our first grant, so we're going to make our first hires. So I think Kalia is going to share, I'm going to have some help. Kalia is going to share our job posting for a senior associate and for a research scholar. So however way you decide to journey with us, be with us, because I think being in this space in the resistance is life-giving. This is what this night has been for me. Thank you both. Thank you, all of you.
Good. Well, that's all good stuff. The only thing I would say is that, obviously, LoveArmy.org, Revolutionary Love Project, the Domestic Workers Alliance, all the great work that the three of us are doing is so important. I read the Bhagavad Gita, and I don't say it the best way. I'm sure there's a better way to say it, but I say the Bhagavad Gita, but you can just Google Gita Gita, and then that way you'll find it. It's an amazing book. And it was a real gateway for me in terms of my engagement with Hinduism. I'm raised a Christian, still a Christian, but I was able to engage with the Hindu faith, which is Gandhi's faith. And I encourage people to read the Bhagavad Gita, because it's a story about a man who's in the middle of a war he doesn't want to be in the middle of. And he has to figure out what to do and how to do it. And I think it's, we're all, that's life. You wind up in the middle of some crazy nonsense that you had no desire to be a part of at all. Sometimes it's world historic. Sometimes it's just trying to get through the next committee meeting, but that's it, and so that book is important. Also, I've done a lot of just self-help and self-healing and that kind of stuff. I did the Landmark Forum. I did the Hoffman Institute. I did Science of Mind. There are so many, when you talk about loving yourself, there's so many programs out there, Tony Robbins, there's so much of that stuff. I think often those of us who are committed to social change forget that the one place that we can have real impact and where we have more chance for real change than any place is within our own selves. How we see ourselves, how we treat ourselves, how we treat others. And that's important. So I just want to lift up Hoffman Institute, Landmark Forum, Science of Mind, so many different self-help programs that I've been a part of that have hopefully helped me be a little bit less crazy, a little bit more constructive. That's pretty much it. Look, next week there's going to be another teach-in. If you're not already a part of the Love Army, sign up at lovearmy.org. The teach-in next week is the American Dream versus the American Reality. That should be very interesting. And to be continued. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Van.